Every man has his heroes, and every life is made up of stories. Heroic Stories is a series from heroicmen.org to find out why some men choose the harder path in life, even when it means losing everything, how they survived, and who they are today. These men seem heroic to us, even if they don't call themselves that. They seem to have an extra strength in their system, extra grit to battle doubt and find purpose. All of these men are seeking divine friendship with God, and they all believe in building up faith, building up men, and building up our future. Sponsored by CatholicSpeakers.com and hosted by Dominic from Heroic Men, get the mindsets, the scars, and the playbooks that these men have earned the hard way. Heroism isn't born, it's made, and these are their stories. Hi, gentlemen, and welcome to Heroic Stories. I'm Dominic from Team Heroic Men, joined by Matthew Plese. Good to have you, Matthew. Welcome.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. We're going to jump into our first segment. First question, which is always fascinating how people answer this in totally different ways. What is your story or a story of heroism that absolutely lights you up? You love to talk about it, I think.
That's a really good question. And the nice thing is, too, like you didn't share any of these questions ahead of time. So this is like very much like on the spot, which I like. And I don't know how familiar you are with my work, but I've written...
For those who haven't, go ahead and
Yep. So
read us in.
I focus on a couple of different things, one of which is Forgotten Catholic Customs. I write for a number of places on that. I have a book on that as well. I actually have it right here. It's called Restoring Lost Customs of Christendom. So that's typically what I focus on. I also work a lot on fasting, and that's my book on fasting, The Definitive Guide to Catholic Fasting and Abstinence. So that's kind of what my subject matter expertise is. So when you ask a question, it's probably going to, dovetail into one of those avenues. And heroism, when I think about that, obviously we're recording this right now in Passiontide, so it's not quite Easter. People might be listening at this any time of year, but, with my work on fasting, especially getting more and more men to go into fasting, and by that I mean like real fasting, like fasting all of Lent and all these other forgotten days. And when you added it up, men would fast about, close to half the year. So, in many respects, you can say that the average man who was a Catholic man for a long time was very much heroic because he was going to work and he was, doing this robust fasting because he was Catholic. And he did it because the church obliged him to do so. And he didn't seek all these different kinds of dispensations or exemptions. He gladly did so. And while I could think about, in answer to that question, a lot of, sayings or prominent stories, I'm actually, just thinking about when I heard a priest give a sermon some years ago, he referred to just people in the community. And this is, in Chicago. And Chicago, we have a large amount of people from all over the world, but we do have a decent Italian population as well. And the Italians invented something here called egg and pepper sandwiches, because during Lent on Fridays or Fridays throughout the year, you can't eat meat, any Friday. So what they would do is they would typically go out for egg and peppers on sandwiches, and that's what they would do. And the priest was talking about how these men would sacrifice people, offering them other food, and they're like, nope, I can't eat that today. I'm going out for something vegetarian. And how it was during a fasting day on Lent, he said these men, even at construction sites, would sit down on their lunch break because they were required by their union to take a lunch break. And we're talking about like the 1930s, 1940s at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And they couldn't eat, so they just sat and did nothing, and they rested, and then they went back to work, and they were hungry, and they waited till they ultimately got home to eat because they observed the law of the church that strictly, and they offered it all up. I think a lot of people, when thinking about heroism, you might think about certain key people, but there's so many of these average individuals who we would call average, whose names we don't know, lived very quiet but heroically Catholic lives because of the sacrifices they did, like those people in the community here who went to work every day with no lunchbox, and they knew it would be a hard day, and they had to wait until they went home for their one meal.
That's amazing. As somebody who researches this sort of thing, can you walk us through, human nature hasn't changed much. We're still fundamentally, we're still the same thing happening, then versus now, but we live differently now, or we don't, pony up to the same demand for sacrifice or fasting, as you've pointed out, in the same way. And so what is it about how men lived back then that you could have groups of men who would just do that, like sit down in the middle of well, for their lunch break and then not have lunch and then go back to work afterwards. What is it about them that they had that we don't have? Or not all of us, but maybe a whole lot of us don't have.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously going to be exceptions now, but when we look at people back then, I feel like people back then took duty in a much more serious understanding. And by that, obviously, I mean duty to one's family, duty to one's country. Think about all the people nowadays who feel like they don't really owe a duty to society or to their city or to their nation, or if they even think that they do, it's sort of this ethereal thought. And what does it really mean in practice? But they also had this very much of a duty to God and to the church. And that was not just to the Ten Commandments, that was to the laws of the church, to the precepts. So if the church says you have to fast and abstain on these days, they did so. I mean, they would typically avail themselves of days in which they had exemptions from that. But if somebody said you have to go to Mass on Sundays and these holy days, that's a precept of the church. That's not of the Ten Commandments, but people would do so. And if you look at Mass attendance too, before about 50 or 60 years ago, it was substantially higher even than it is now, even though the church's law is still the same. Same thing with the law of fasting and absence. So many people might disregard it, but these people very observed it. And some of them chose to do so even more than the minimum. So there's a lot to be said about that, because it's the sense of duty that the church, if we believe the church is what she is, as the body of Christ and who can legislate laws, then we willingly do so. We willingly observe that. So I think the loss of duty and of discipline and of understanding too that things can be hard, but that doesn't make them bad. There's a little bit, I feel like, of a renaissance in that, especially if you look at in the world of physical education and men getting more active. I see it too, and drinking less and exercising more and trying to have more of a balanced life in that respect. Those people who typically do so, those are the people who might be advancing, going to the sauna and taking a cold shower and things like that. Those people tend to be a little more agreeable to the idea of, I should probably do fasting. And I tell them, take it from intermittent fasting, which these fitness influencers talk about, and simply layer it on to what does the church traditionally require of us. And you'll find that intermittent fasting can very much be laid onto this. And these are the days you should observe. So here's what it looked like. So you can really combine a lot of these practical aspects of bettering yourself for your family and individually, but you can do so in a way that's also in complete accordance with our Catholic heritage. And thus you take on a very much of a spiritual meaning too. And thus you have that duty coming back.
So, what is it about all of these stories and this focus on duty, this sense of honor that I'm hearing from you? What is it about you that this matters to you?
hmm Well, that's a good question, because some years ago, it was right around the time of the pandemic. So let's say 5 or 6 years ago, I started researching this. So I write for a number of different Catholic organizations, and I regularly do a lot of different Catholic speeches as well, like the Catholic Speakers Organization I'm a part of. But what I wanted to do is, I noticed out there when it comes to writing or speaking, a lot of people focus on the same things. And what I want to do is I wanted to go into an avenue that I found was really not being highlighted. And that was the world of fasting and absence. And what I discovered was actually very interesting, because a lot of priests don't even really know this heritage because it's not taught to them. They're not focused on the history. And as I got into it, I found there was actually a lot of conflicting and actually false information out there, even published in different books on various websites for religious orders even. And it's simply because you've heard something, so it must be true if it's been told enough times and it's posted on there, and you lose the particulars. For instance, I've often tell people that until basically Vatican II, Christmas Eve was a fasting day. And thus you had to observe fasting and absence on that day. And tell you, so many people come to me and say that's not true, because when I was a kid, my grandma would cook me all these desserts and we would have all these celebrations on Christmas Eve. And I tell these people, it's not like your memory is incorrect. That's true. But what you fail to realize is you were like 9 years old. So you weren't bound to fast anyway because you were too young. And your grandma, she was too old. She didn't have to fast. So your having dessert was fine because you only were required to have abstinence then based on your ages. So what's interesting is both can be true. So people simply don't have accurate information. So what I set out to do was I set out to document and to truly understand what we lost as a society, as a church, when so many of these practices were lost. And what I really built was a roadmap of basically when Christianity reaches apex in the Middle Ages, high Middle Ages, about the 12th or so century, we had about a third of the year was days of mandatory abstinence. Half of the year was days of mandatory abstinence, and a third of the year was fasting. So how could we have gone from all of that to just a handful of days now? So it didn't happen overnight. It was like the metaphor, you put a frog in water and you boil it slowly. That's what it was, because they would take away days here and there with different exceptions. So I wanted to understand why, to what people, to what extent, and to help restore that. Because to answer your question, a lot of people focus on negatives, whether it's the news, with society, with the church, with their family. Yeah, I feel like it's natural to focus on negatives. And when you do so, you naturally will feel powerless. What can I do? There's nothing I can do about these geopolitical issues or these issues in the church or even things in my family. They're outside of my ability to influence. But people forget that you do have the ability to pray and to offer sacrifice. And many people will say you should pray about it and you should do things about it, and that's good. But our Lord said some demons are driven out only by prayer and by fasting. And a lot of people forget about that fasting. It was almost like our Lord really wanted us to focus on both. And in fact, the church fathers say the apostles were the ones who instituted the Lenten fast and began the practice of every single Friday throughout the year fasting and abstaining, and every Wednesday too.
How cool.
So that was started by the apostles. So when you look at that, you're like, that's something I can do. I can pray more and I can fast more and sacrifice. And that's something all men can do to certain extents of their life. You don't have to go from nothing to that half of the year. And I wouldn't encourage that. But like my book and a lot of the works that I do and the speeches that I give are trying to give people this kind of roadmap to here's what you might aspire to do as a family. And here are ideas to live out this, because our Lord wants sacrifice, and sacrifice in the state of grace. One of the best ways we can do that is fasting and abstaining. And to that, we couple prayer. So that's what I just think more people have the ability to do so. So why not? And there's so many different kinds of fasting. There's so many stories about that. I mean, I even know one guy from college who was very overweight in school, and he adopted this practice a few years ago, and he is much physically healthier for his kids. He's actually lost a lot of weight. Not that why we do fasting in the religious sense, but it is a byproduct of that. So he's healthier too. So, if you look at the average American diet now, it's so poor. And one thing that we can do is simply understanding that by fasting, and when we do eating good food, it's actually really, really good for us. And the church has almost given us this roadmap to do so. And that's not even to say all the mental benefits that come from it too.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you before we get into the next segment. What are some of the positive benefits and outcomes that you've mentioned? Some physical ones, obviously, there, but what are some of maybe the mental ones, spiritual ones, psychological
Yeah.
ones? What are some of these benefits that come when we start implementing these kinds of habits? Because somebody, for example, guys listening to this show are interested in this idea of heroism, and it seems to me a pretty essential part of whatever heroic journey you're on. There's going to be some component of fasting. Somebody goes and takes military training, you are fasting from the rest of your life and everything that you could pay attention to dial in your focus and all of your energies on accomplishing specific goals to help you achieve certain outcomes. So that is an entire regimen focused around all kinds of different fasting,
Sure.
mindsets and so on. And so we're now trying to, we've got to figure out our own ways, not being in, say, military or firefighters or being a doctor or whatever, to start applying this as married men, single men, in college, specific regimens of fasting. And so, yeah, what are some of the outcomes when we do apply them? Basically, how does it make life better when you before going too far, right? Because there's some people who go like fast maxing or whatever, and you go all the way to the other side, and then you completely lose the point of the whole thing, and you're obsessed with yourself all over again. You didn't really learn anything. So trying to keep a balanced way, and obviously someone has to go buy your book to figure out how to go do it all, but what are some of the outcomes that are beneficial?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a good question. So, first of all, understand obviously it's done for spiritual benefits. There's a lot of physical benefits too, though you could go too extreme and thus you're focused so much on the physical benefits, it's just a diet and it's no longer a fast. Obviously, the right intention matters a lot. Offering it up, including, for instance, in your morning offering prayer, you might say, offer all my prayers, the works, everything of this day. Mention fasting by name. You mention that, then it very much takes on that spiritual significance. If you look at St. Thomas Aquinas, he asks the question, why do we fast? And he gives, a kind of a three-part answer. We fast, to bridle the lusts of the flesh, to free up our mind to more easily contemplate heavenly things, and to make restitution for sin. So those are kind of the three reasons why we fast. And it's very heroic also, I feel, to not just do so for yourself because you feel like you owe a debt to God, but also understanding that you're fasting for other people. So obviously you can pray for other people. You can also fast for other people. You can fast for the souls in purgatory. You can fast for really anybody in any intention. And thus it takes on very much a mystical meaning in that regard. So there's a lot of benefit that can come out of that. And then obviously too, you have a lot of physical benefits too. So like if men are struggling, especially with sins against the sixth or ninth commandment, when you look at that, like St. Thomas Aquinas said, that's one of the main weapons you have against that is simply to fast more. And when you do so, you got to naturally be eating less. So you have more free time. So you typically pray more. So if you're always finding like, oh, I wish I could pray, I just don't have time. Well, if you don't have lunch, that's that extra time. So people are like, I can't say the rosary, I'm too busy, or I don't have time to pray at all. Well, just don't use your lunch break for lunch and just use it for that. And there you go. There's your time right there. So it can bring families together. It can really make it possible for men to offer a sacrifice like that. And I mean, God very much appears to people in history and different saints who, when they were fasting, such things were accomplished. Like one thing that a lot of people don't realize is what, I'm talking about here about just fasting, the sense of only eating one meal, throughout the day. But we can also talk about the Eucharistic fast. Before Holy Communion, you have to fast. And people now would know that to be 1 hour. But until the 1950s, it was changed by Pope Pius XII twice. So right before this current version, it was 3 hours. He also originally changed it because for basically 2,000 years, it was the same thing. And that was no food whatsoever from midnight on and nothing, not even water. So that's why if you talk to people who are very old right now and they went to Catholic elementary school, they would say like the nuns would cover the water fountain when they woke up first thing in the morning so children didn't actually drink water in the morning because you might just do so. So that says how long the practice has gone for. So when we're talking about that, you have to understand, like some of these stories you hear, this is the context. And one of which I'm thinking of is the man who started a St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. He was a Catholic, and I believe he was he might have been a Maronite, or he's from Lebanon. I forget exactly. But anyway, he would often, I believe, perform in New York at night. And he would, I think, these different clubs, or maybe it was comedy shows. But the point was it going past midnight, okay? And then he would often go to Mass very early Sunday morning, kind of like on his way home before he even got home. So it's important to understand, too, that he was fasting, obviously. He was not drinking or not eating anything because midnight had hit and he's still working and he goes there to, and he said that one of these days when he got to Mass really early on Sunday, he had that inspiration came to him to start St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Wow. So a lot of people have these benefits. God speaks to you when you're fasting. Just like if you look at different prophets and the different saints, like Elijah and such. So there's a lot that can be said about opening your mind as well, because the mental clarity, like St. Thomas Aquinas is talking about. And I mean, even though a Byzantine priest who once gave a whole sermon on the mental benefits of fasting and how he had different scientific studies he was reading from and how it was confirming basically what the church has said for a long time, that it was good for your mental health, that it was, could potentially prevent things like the onset of Alzheimer's or dementia or things like that. So I touch on that a little bit in my book, but there's a lot of benefits that come in one's mind and one's body, in addition, obviously, to the spiritual benefits and the opening yourself up to divine inspiration. The difficulty is just sometimes these mental challenges. For instance, I do a lot of marathons, and when you're running for hours and hours and hours on end, not like it's naturally a hard decision, but when you're doing so, how do you quiet your mind to focus on just getting through what you're doing for a long time.
It seems like a constant fasting of attention and will, right? To
For
just
sure,
keep
yeah.
putting one foot in front of the other to keep it going. How long does a marathon run for that you go through?
20
Okay, how long does that take you? 4 hours?
my best time right now is about 3:15.
Okay, wow. How long have you been doing that for?
Well, I got into that only in 2020, actually. So now as of today, I've run 9.
Amazing.
And this year I have 10, 11, and 12 all scheduled. And I've gotten friends to do it too, over the years. I'm running one in June in Duluth, Minnesota with a really good friend of mine from college who for years told me he could never do such a thing. And I've convinced him to do so. And he always told me for years he thought his knee would fall off or something. Sure enough, at last weekend, he told me he's up to like 16 miles now and he feels like he could actually probably pull it off. And I'm like, that's the thing because so many people give up when things get difficult. And it's not like it's a one time, fork in the road decision for a lot of these things. A lot of times it's that hard slug of, can you get through this over time, days and weeks? And that's
So
the
why did
mental
you,
difficulty.
yeah, why did you get into marathoning? You said 2010?
Oh, 2020, around
Excuse me,
2020.
2020? Okay, so relatively recently. So were you
Yeah.
always an athletic kind of guy?
No, no, not at all. I was just getting bored with the pandemic and there was nothing to
Okay.
do. So, and most things were closed. So I thought, well, I'll go on some runs. And after a little bit, I'm like, I actually kind of liked it. Even though initially at first it was kind of hard. So I ran my first marathon in Chicago in 2021. So I had been running maybe just a little bit over a year. The funny thing is the Chicago Marathon was my first race ever. So like some of the people I see now, they're like, "Oh, what do you mean you didn't do all these 5Ks and 10Ks and half marathons to prepare?" I'm like, "No, I just signed up and trained for it and did it." So now everyone else actually feels a little bit shorter, which is kind of cool. I don't know if I necessarily recommend that, but everybody, I think, especially a lot of men, should consider doing that. I mean, like a lot of people say it's not for them, it's too hard, but that kind of preparation, that kind of mental acuity that comes from that daily in training of quieting your mind and you can focus on a lot of things. I know a guy who he says rosary with one of those rosary rings with just when he does all his runs, because when you start running a lot like that, you probably run 60 plus miles a week, 60, 70 miles a week going into these, and then you taper off. But anyway, it takes up a lot of time. It's a huge time commitment. So I feel like there's not been a whole lot of struggles in my own life where the question was such a big pivotal one. Do I say yes or no here? It's often like the struggles are that going through the same thing over and over and over again and persisting through that. And that's, I feel like physical activity, like long distance running specifically, really helps people quiet the mind.
Yeah, well, you come across, or I think you are very academic, so I assume your mind is busy all the time. So it sounds like it's a bit of a relief to be able to get into a running habit, a running pattern, and then just have it quietened down. Do you, when you go to select a marathon beginning and ending locations, are they just between cities? You pick them arbitrarily, or do they go between like holy places, or how do you define these?
Well, there's all kinds of, these marathons around the world. So I'm trying to run all the world major marathons. So there's 6 of them. So I've run 5 of the 6 so far. There's now like a new one, Sydney. And I got into that one this year too. So in Sydney, Australia, I'm supposed to go the end of
Wow.
August. I'm raising
Okay.
money for charity for that one. But a lot of these too, like the majors, you usually raise money for charity also. So it's a good fundraising effort. But other than that, there's just a lot of cities have marathons. Some are much bigger than others, like these world major ones I typically run. These are like 50,000 plus people running. So there might be several million of people and spectators, like Boston, New York, London, Berlin, Chicago. These are things I've run before that are versus Miami. I ran that just for fun, not as big of a crowd. Definitely a different struggle because, some of these ones where you have a lot of spectators cheering you on, that can really boost you up. But like Miami, that was relatively quiet. So getting through that without all of that kind of support, that's a whole nother challenge.
Amazing. So, okay, next question then is who are some of your heroes? People that you orient your life around. They can be saints, historical figures, maybe movie figures. But yeah, who are the heroes that kind of define you as a man or that you aim towards?
Well, I could think of a few, but we're still in March. Today we're recording this last day of March, and St. Patrick has always been one of my absolute favorite saints, absolute favorite role models. I always tell people that if God willing one day I make it to heaven, he's one of the first people I want to talk to.
Really? So why? Why St. Patrick?
Well, so my grandmother is 100% Irish. So I think her grandfather came from Ireland, but she is 100% Irish. So there was a little bit of that element too. But if you look at Patrick's life, like that was an extraordinary life,
Mhm.
of what he did, of being sold into slavery and brought back and becoming a bishop and being sent to Ireland. I don't think a lot of people really focus on just how bad Ireland was at that time because it was run mainly by these pagans they had the Druid religion there, which was kind of like the Aztec equivalent because they believed in human sacrifice. A lot of people don't talk
Okay.
about that. So the Druids of Ireland literally would sacrifice like children. And thus, when you hear the story of St. Patrick and the Easter fire, like how it was one night when only these druids could be starting these fires, and it was Holy Saturday, and he defiantly started an Easter fire. It was almost like declaring war on the druids. And thus, they tried to kill him over time, but they killed his bodyguard once, shot him with an arrow, and they missed Patrick. So you look at all the struggles he went through for everything that he did for God and for Ireland, and how when he ultimately died, how many people he brought from this really barbarian lifestyle to this peaceful, Catholic lifestyle. Quite extraordinary what God was able to
Okay.
do through him. But
Wow.
if you think too, like I even talk about this a little bit in my book, he fasted a lot and he prayed a lot. And a lot of people don't think about all the sacrifices he did. There's a story that he would, it was said at night, recite all 150 Psalms every night. And 50 of
Wow.
them he would recite while kneeling. And I think 50 of them while standing and then genuflecting. And 50 of those while kneeling in water. Something like that. All this additional penance. So he's doing all this activity, physical activity, but he's still finding all this time to do these penances. That's why there's actually a pilgrimage still in Ireland, and I forget the exact name, but it goes to some of these holy sites affiliated with St. Patrick, and it's considered like the hardest pilgrimage physically to do. Like, I think you have to fast for multiple days before you could do so. If people could search online, there's different articles about it, but I know they even said like sometimes people would do this, and thus they would send somebody in like a week later to see if you survived, if you were still
My
alive, because
goodness.
how physically challenging it was to do so. So the Irish people were really great people, very heroic, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for them. Even in my book on fasting, I talk about how when almost every place in the world got rid of Wednesday abstinence, the Irish were one of the last places in the world until like the 17. You still couldn't have, dairy or eggs or anything like that on Wednesdays throughout the year because that was the day in which Christ was betrayed. So they're very, very faithful and very heroic, I think, in their own life of sacrifices. So St. Patrick, one of my great heroes.
Amazing. Is that pilgrimage you mentioned, is that on your bucket list?
That might be
Might be.
one of the things literally on my bucket list is to hike the Camino. So
Okay.
I'm hoping to do that very soon. I'm sure you're familiar with the Camino
Yes.
in,
Nominally, yeah,
Britain.
yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
St. Patrick. Anybody else you'd add to that, well, yeah, to that lineup of heroic people or heroic men that you admire?
that's a tough one. Well, St. Patrick is definitely top of mind right now. Another one that would definitely come to mind was St. John, too, for everything. And we don't need to go into all of his life details too, but I'm a third order Dominican, and I chose his name in the Dominican order because I thought he blended the contemplative life with the active life so well, and everything that he struggled for. And people always associate him with, being the one who wasn't martyred, but the church for a long time had that second feast day of St. John before the Latin Gate, because he was boiled alive. He was just miraculously saved. So, in a certain sense, he was kind of a martyr, but I feel like he's kind of, left out of that. Like people forget about all the sacrifices that he actually did, but everything that he suffered until his ultimate, banishment on an island, when he received the revelations then. But those are two of my favorite saints. So they're just very heroic people to me.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Yeah, I'd forgotten about him being preserved from boiling. My
Yeah.
gosh. I could imagine everyone going, okay, let's obviously the gods or God has favor on him. Be very careful how you handle him. Just banish this guy. Final question, closing question for you is, who do you seek to be a hero for? And the caveats to the question are perhaps your family or God are givens, so that can't be part of your answer. So who do you seek to put heroic effort into serving with the work that you do, the ministry that you do?
Yeah, so one thing I didn't notice, I'm the president of catechismclass.com. So we produce online religious education courses. We've been doing this now for about 20 years for online education. And I can think just hundreds of people have become Catholic through the resources that we put through the online classes who can't attend in-person classes, or hundreds of people have received their first communion through studying from us, or just, had their faith increased as a result of these classes. And so many people even too said they were raised Protestant, but our classes showed them that, they're willing to make the jump, even though it takes a lot of sacrifice, with their family. So there's a lot that can be said on that, but I try to every day view my work that I physically do very much as a ministry to these people. So I try to be a hero to them, to respond to them, to think about them, to pray for the people I serve as well, whether that be, the godparents. We do a very large godparent offering where we're the leaders in godparent classes. So I just think about, we serve thousands of people. I would like to ultimately be a hero to those people who I touch through the work that I do.
Beautiful. Well, closing question then. For the gentlemen listening to this show who are seeking ways to be heroic in their own lives, what would be, if you had a minute, share a word of encouragement out of your own stories, your own experience, your own spirituality? What would you encourage them? What would you leave them with?
Definitely give in to fasting. It's very important. It's something I think all men absolutely need to do. When I started to, initially I thought it'd be too hard, but it's not. It's not. There's so much you can do beyond really what you're doing right now or what you think you're capable of. And I've seen it firsthand with my adoption of fasting in my own life. I've seen it as well in marathon runnings. I was not athletic before. Now I've run 9 marathons. So there's so much that can be said about you can be much more than you think you are, that the mind is really the limiting thing in so many instances. It's usually not a physical thing. It's usually not a time thing. You can find time. You can prepare. Those would be very rare exceptions. For most people, it's the ability to just get out, make the time, and be wanting to do that sacrifice. So I hope if somebody's listening to this and Lent's over, you don't think you have to wait till next year. Besides year-round Friday absence, there's Ember days, there's these different vigils. There was even a 40-day fast leading up to Christmas. The first 2 weeks of August were observed as a fast in honor of Our Lady's Assumption for a very long time. There's so many of these forgotten things that you can just simply pick up and say, I want to do so because my forefathers did so. And they did so under obligation. I don't do these under obligation now, but I would gladly do so because I'm more united to them. And they're in heaven. They look down on me, and I do this to be united with them and to improve myself and my family and those around me.
Thanks for joining us. If this story connected with you, send it to someone. And if you want to chat with us about anything that we've said, send us a message at heroicmen.org/stories. Our partner at CatholicSpeakers.com has built the easiest way to book powerful Catholic speakers for your men's event. They are the #1 resource worldwide for event organizers and Catholic speakers. Book easily, confidently, and ask for several grants to support ministry to men. Visit heroicmen.org/speakers today. Come and share your journey in the Heroic Brotherhood, our online community for Catholic men like you. Get the app with the best Catholic media for men, including Heroic Men's original series, Be a Man. It's all free because an alliance of donors already paid it forward for you. Stand with us. Let's build the future of Catholic men. Will you pay it forward? $5 a month pays it forward for 5 men. Visit Heroic Men to stand with us. Because men like us, we leave no man behind. Visit heroicmen.org today.